Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This big a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Evil. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, I've talked about this before in previous ones, but I always think it's so interesting when one episode ends off on one particular case. Like the last episode ended with them starting this case, like actually showing up at the monastery, and in this episode involves that. S is for silence, as they're not allowed to speak because basically ever since this monastery was founded 130 years ago, they've been quiet ever since. Like no word has ever been spoken, so please don't break that. So each one of them has their own little board. I love that Kristen has Casper, Ben has Robin Hood, and David has Star Trek. And just writing down, it's like, all right, here's Father Winston, here's Manuel. And I love the moment Kristen starts walking in, and it's kind of like, all right, let's do this. We're not going to speak or anything. And then she starts getting looks, and I'm like, that's weird. At first I was like, does she recognize that guy or something? But he was pretty eyeballing her. And in a moment, she starts walking, and then more people show up and start following her. And then it's a whole bunch of people, and she's looking behind, and she kind of taps Ben, what is that about? And he's kind of like, So they go and examine Father Thomas, the dead body that they're supposed to be seen, because they want to see if he is if he should be obtaining sainthood. And so as they're examining his body and stuff like that, one of the priests has an issue, and you're like, because I thought he was why do they have to desecrate his body? I thought that's what it was, because Ben's got to do that, which I love. When he got there, it's like, I gotta keep my phone because I gotta take pictures and stuff like that. But obviously Kristen has to worry about her kids and everything, but it's he's like, I gotta take pictures and everything. They're like, we understand. And then still hand over your phone. They remove the SIM card and everything and give it back, and Ben's almost like, thanks. But obviously he's doing the examination, but the dude stops partway through and he writes something on his board, and it looks like they turn to Kristen. I'm like, oh, Kristen can't be there because she's a woman and blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, I guess it's that whole situation is based off very old school religious stuff or something to some extent. But as she's walking and then noticing that everyone's looking at her, and then she just opens up her jacket to kind of, even though she's wearing her shirt underneath, just kind of to flash her boobs to be like, yeah, I'm a woman. And it's yeah, because we see, I'm about to say, is she going to be the only woman there? But we see at least with Kristen, it's 4 women there. Because I think that's so interesting, because that is something we haven't really seen. This season's the first season to really touch on that, because on the church side of things, David's mainly interacted with dudes. So when he got introduced to the sister being a recurring character, this what's her name? It's Sister Adrian or Adrian. Yeah, I think so. Adriana. I'm always blanking on her name, but she's that's the first time we really get to showcase that side of things. And I think it's kind of very befitting that it's kind of oh yeah, we've been here the entire time. We know more about you guys than anything you think we do, but we just kind of get brushed aside. It's the sisters, they're not the faces to the church to a certain extent, the fathers and the priests are type of situation. Maybe that's kind of what that's getting at. But yeah, there's the nun that she ends up helping in this episode, Finna, which I even love it later on. She's getting can we find out what Finna's whole duty is? It's one of her duties is basically she pours whiskey in a bucket. I'm like, what's that about? I'm like, what? I don't get it. But I do love that her and Kristen are sharing drinks, and Finna knocks it back like it's nothing, and you have Kristen being wow, and does it herself, but just goes coughs because it hits her hard. But it's also I guess laughing, it's you're supposed to be silent, so not any noise either, but it's kind of a no-no, but I guess they'll let laughing to a certain extent slide. But I love that it's cool, what she does is, because the way the alcohol that monastery makes is from whiskey soaked barrels, so that's what she does. She gets in the barrels and soaks the insides. Honestly, those scenes probably had to be so weird and funny to film those. I'm sure some of that is just kind of the nature of okay, I bet you some of that just feels that's probably behind the scenes stuff that they kept, because it's just the slipping and sliding on the inside. It just feels yeah, it's yeah, it just it probably adds to the genuine fun between Kristen and Finna. But it's yeah, that had to be so weird to film that. Also, just because my brain works, when Kristen's getting her feet washed, I'm like, someone's into this. This is someone's kink. Like, no kink shaming today, but it's just like, that's immediately where my mind went. I'm like, oh, I mean, the actress, Katya, which I'm probably, like, butchering her name, like, is a very beautiful lady, and on top of that, like, that's very nice feet, but it's also, like, that's coming from a dude who doesn't have a thing for feet. At least I don't think I have a thing for feet. You never know what you're into. You never know what your kink is until it happens. You're like, oh, this is my thing, but I've never really looked at feet like that. At least I don't think I have, but it's like, but just, like, I'm immediately like, oh, like, her feet are on just full-blown display, and they're getting washed, too. I'm like, someone's getting off to this. Hey, whatever rocks your boat. Like I said, no kink shaming. Just like my brain immediately went there thinking that. But I love that she's like, oh, this is weird. But Finna's like, no English, me Dutch. And it's kind of like, oh, okay. Which isn't the actress who plays Kristen. I don't know if she's necessarily. I think she's Dutch, isn't she? Isn't that what that's? I think she's. I don't know whether it's like she's descendant from Dutch or like I'm probably getting that wrong. I swear, like, because I don't think she's. I don't think she's American. I think she's something else. I don't remember. So I don't know if that was like that. I swear she's Dutch, but she might not be. Because I actually don't even know what she sounds. Because I don't know if she's like as Kristen, is she putting on an accent, or is that how? I think she's putting on an accent. Because when you listen to her voice, you kind of feel like that could be like someone putting on an accent. That might not. I don't think I've ever heard any interviews. Because things I've seen her in this in Westworld, things I kind of best know her for, she's putting on an American accent and doing that. So I don't know, that might actually be just like how she naturally sounds, but it sounds like it could be like her putting on an American accent. Like I said, I've never, like, I need to watch some interviews just to hear what, like, her natural accent sounds like, if it's that or something else. Regardless, I'm going on a huge tangent and stuff like that, but it's like, cool, just kind of bonding with Finna. But it, you know, language barrier aside, then it actually kind of deepens the bond because they can't talk, which I love later on when Ben and, David show up and they see Kristen, and Ben's kind of noticing. He kind of taps David to look at her, and she's kind of like she's so bubbly this episode, which is that it just adds the cuteness. Like, she's already an adorable, cute person, but like I think like a lot of this episode like showcased her cuteness to the umpth level, which I thought was kind of interesting. I love that she was beside the father and she kind of hiccups, and he kind of looks at her. It's like, yeah, and then she's kind of like smelling her own breath, and she gets beside Ben, and Ben's kind of almost like, it's okay. Like, he's like, and she's just kind of like, ugh. But, because basically Ben and David at first were looking at this, like, chest thing that has, apparently has a demon sealed inside, because it was, like, oozing stuff. I'm like, what is that supposed to be like? They never explained, like, what it was that was oozing. I was like, is that supposed to be, like, at first I was thinking, like, honey or something. I didn't know what, or, like, sap. I wasn't sure what to make of that. Sap is what I was thinking of, not honey. I just couldn't think of the word sap at the time. But then we find out, like, the second miracle, it's not just Father Thomas's body, it's also Finna, because she has the stigmas on her, like, hands, like, from when Jesus was crucified. And at first, Kristen kind of chalks it up to, no, it's probably not real, because, like, what Finna does, like, you know, barrowing the bottles over, that's most likely, like, because Kristen's like, look at my hands, I did this for, like, 5 hours, she's the one that does this, like, every day by herself, so it's probably a byproduct of that, so she doesn't think much of it. Ben's obviously being, you know, obviously skeptical as well, like, looking into a lot of this stuff. And so, Kristen ends up being around Finna, and obviously they have like a translator as she's kind of explaining, like, okay, I'm investigating the miracles. And then Finna has to send a priest away because it's like, once again, it's like, because she has to, it's once again old school religion of like, right, button up, cover yourself, like it's shameless to kind of show too much skin or whatever. So at first she was I was like, oh, you have to strip down to show her something, but at first it's like, oh, you just had to show her your feet. It was like, oh, that's a shame that you have to, like, because it's an issue for, I guess, a man to see too much of your body or whatever. So I'm like, oh, like, so you have to, like, strip down, you have to kick him out of the room just so you can show Kristen your feet. So it's like, okay, so it's not just your hands, because the hands could be explained away. Her feet, now that's another thing. And then we see the mark on, like, where the spear went in to Jesus, and I'm like, oh, interesting. At first I was like, well, they never explained what that was. We never got an explanation for that, right? Or am I being... they kind of never really explained. They explained everything else, which we'll get to soon enough. But even David hearing about the stigmas is kind of like, wait, whoa, really? Like, this is crazy. So, taking pictures and stuff like that. Which, I Also, I love that it is a thing of like, right, this episode is, I was about to say, is this episode going to be entirely without verbal dialogue? But it's like, nah, the trio sneaks away, like, for like 2 scenes in the episode, they sneak away to like talk amongst each other about like what's going on. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. But still, like, most of the episode goes without verbal dialogue. It's not like you don't have to, you still have to write dialogue, because you still have, well, not even write. I wonder, is that probably easier or harder, like writing an entire episode with no dialogue? Because you still have to write a script of like what happens and kind of explain everything and give everyone an idea what they're supposed to be doing and everything. But it's still got to be, I think that's probably less interesting, because it's like, right, you don't have to write lines for people necessarily. I mean, except for like when they have like writing stuff down, but it's just like, oh, Kristen does this, David does this, Kristen kind of makes this gesture, and like, you know, like you have to, there's a lot more emoting, like, you know, and I'm sure maybe like that's actually kind of a better for an actor, because it's like, right, I get to like flex, like emoting and getting my emotions across rather than just using my words, using my body language and stuff like that. Especially because David was feeling awkward because of that whole "I want you" he saw in his room. I think that was after he was trying to silence his mind with the other fathers, and they're just all praying away, and he's just like, all right, got to clear my mind. He's like, wait, that looks like somebody threw up there. It's like, all right, I just need to stop thinking about not worry about thinking about some monk throwing up, and he's just looking to the side, because I think it's like, right, they're so focused, but I think there's also some part of his brain like, which one of them did it though? He's like, no, I'm messing this up. He's like, all right. And he's just like, clear your mind. Just stop thinking about it. Stop, clear. And he's just like, fuck. And I just love this sliding text. Fuck. Fuckity fuck, 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 fuck. Kristen? Fuck. And then he starts thinking about Kristen's lips. And I'm like, yo, the sexual tension is there, dude. It's been there for a while. And he's just kind of like, this isn't going to work. And then coming into his room with that sign being like, I want you to stay associated with Kristen. So he's a little awkward around her. Which I love that whole thing. Also, what was it? Her being put to the other table, because it's like, right, like, and the guy comes over, he's smiling and everything, picks up her food and just automatically takes it over. She's almost like, what? Aaron kind of waves Ben and David by. She has to sit over there, and I love that her and Fenna are just like, Fenna gets up and tells the other sister to move over, and it's like she wants to sit beside Kristen, and they pull out. I'm like, she got a new best bud across this episode. I love it. But then like the fathers or priests or whatever come by and like slam their like. I don't know whether that's kind of the usual thing of like, right, we're leaving this for you to clean up type of thing. I don't know what that's what's supposed to be, or was it just supposed to be like a middle finger to Kristen because like she's disturbing like the flow of how things are, and she's just like signing to like David like, what the fuck. I actually skipped over it a little bit, but I do love the fact is that she was like looking at David, and David was kind of giving her looks, and she's like, why is he looking at me like that? And then she starts thinking about stuff, and I'm like, dude, it's not like a one-way street. It's like both of them are feeling that vibe. But then she also, like, where she has to sleep, which is super awkward because it's all those statues and everything. And she's got that little sliver of room where it's like, that's where her bed is. And it's kind of like, nah. Which even, like, she was hanging her lantern on one of the statues. I was like, isn't that super sacrilegious to do that? And then she just, like, it's like, that room is just super spooky. Because that's another thing, too, like, that was the way this, I had actually skipped over it because David had actually explained like what this place's whole deal was, that there was a demon sealed away like 130 years ago, and so this monastery was built around that, and they've been looking after it ever since. If you speak anything, you're going to awaken and release the demon, so that's why they don't speak anything, which both David and Kristen are like, yeah, sure, demon in there, blah, blah, blah. Like, they didn't believe it, obviously. They're the skeptics of the group. But it's also like, right, they built their, like, regardless of how you feel about it, this is still the way they've operated for so long. So it's like, who are we to come into their home and tell them they're wrong for operating the way that they do? Yeah, it's weird to us, but it is the way that they operate. So, but the moment, like, Kristen's just kind of staring at the statue, and the moment she's like, boo, I was like, is that not going to be an issue? Because the whole point is, like, they gag themselves in their sleep so they don't, like, end up speaking, which is, like, super hardcore. Well, once again, my mind being it is probably someone else's kink too. But nevertheless, I was like, didn't you just do a big no-no? And then we hard cut to that where the demon is sealed, opening wide up, and then there's a crack. I was like, wait, is she about to get possessed or something? Like, well, she's got all that other stuff going on right now. Does she need one more thing? but then like she wakes up, and then all of a sudden everyone's screaming out in pain because like people got these marks that are undulating and stuff. And I love the look on Kristen's face, like her going like, yikes, did I do this? Because I did say boo, and then I immediately gagged myself afterwards. But that was like before she had like, once again, it's like every weird thing is happening to her. Granted, Ben's getting some of that this season as well, but like first it's like George last season, now actually seeing the devil, and then now this skeleton coming to life. I love at one point it just stops, just to the weirdness of the show, it stops to kind of pick its teeth, and then it comes over to her. I almost halfway expected it to lean in towards her and go boo. Like I thought that's what was going to happen, but it didn't. But yeah, it's just all that's going on, and obviously it's happening to Finna as well. So Kristen wants to actually get her an actual doctor, but David's like, no, we got to respect what they do here. We also got to get like an exorcist. We got to handle this from a spiritual standpoint because he thinks this is demonic possession and stuff like that. There's some demonic going on in this angle. And Kristen obviously like, no, like Finna's going to die. It's like, wait, who's Finna? It's like the nun. Like the fact of the matter is this place is so fucking anti-woman. But then like you had Ben. He had done his side of investigating earlier where he went to Father Thomas where he was like kept, and there were scratch marks all over the inside, and he was like, that doesn't make any sense. What's that about? And when he was down there, he was being chased by a darkness. And so the question is like, was that a byproduct of like, right, his time, like when that elevator got stuck, like what was that, episode 4, E is for elevator, that episode, like maybe it's still trauma and PTSD associated with that, so the darkness creeping in started, because I almost halfway expected him to run into his succubus again. I thought like she was going to come here at a point where he couldn't talk or something. I thought that'd be a thing, but it ended up not being the case. He did kind of zoom into the darkness, and maybe that's where he kind of picked up what was going on. I don't know, but we end up finding out later on, which, you know, Emmanuel hooked Ben up with a computer, you know, and it's like, and he looked into it, and we, lo and behold, the one exorcist is at this place is, the father that got sent away for his gambling and all his other issues. He was there, which even Kristen's almost looking like, really him? It's almost like he's the only one here. Excuse me. And so he does this thing, which he starts mouthing words. I'm like, does that technically work? Considering the fact is that you're not actually saying the words out loud, but I guess a lot of that is about intent. It's the whole conversation last episode, like, oh, it might not have been holy water, but my intention, I believed it to be holy water, so that made it holy water. Like, I'm wondering if it's kind of that vein of like, right, it's not, the words don't need to be said aloud, but it's also that thing of like, right, anytime you use a technique in a move, like a TV show or an anime or something like that, does it technically need you to, like, do you need to call out Kamehameha every time you use it? I mean, technically speaking, maybe, probably not. It just depends. It allows you to know what's happening and what's going on, I guess. But I guess the same thing kind of applies in this case of like, you don't need to verbally send it. What matters is your intent. Your intent is to get these words across, and you're saying them to God to channel the energy. So I guess it's no different from praying, I guess. But when it's all said and done, it turns out that it is like an infection. Like these particular flies burrow under the skin and they're laying their eggs. Because like that thing with Finna was gnarly, dude. Especially like, when they start wiping alcohol and she's like screaming, and then like it busts open, a whole bunch of flies come out, and now it's like, okay. So basically, when they brought up Father Thomas's body, they brought up these bot flies, and that's what this is all about. And they were what was sealed in the box. It also explains like the camera angle we saw of like, oh, like the slit in the wood, and then we see that flyover view, like, oh, we're seeing it from a demon's point of view. But I'm like, well, if you go to like some like Four Horsemen stuff, you do have like pestilence and stuff. So that's why I'm kind of like, I was like, so because I was about to say Kristen's like boo was just coincidental, but I'm also like, at the time it was meant to be misleading like that to make it. But it's also like, right, like when you go to like old school like biblical stuff, there's plagues and stuff, so it's like there might be something to it. Like the demonic thing was this, it was kind of a plague, and it, you know, so maybe that's what that was about. I don't know. Either way, the alcohol is what brings them to the surface, and then they bust free, and they kind of do it for everyone. So that all works out. I did really appreciate Kristen staying with Finna, and like you can see her kind of like marking the like cross on her, because earlier Kristen was kind of like praying with Finna. She's because obviously she's not a believer, but and even David's kind of sure looks like, wait, she's kind of shrugging like, I don't know, I guess I gotta go with the flow. Like I can't really fight her on this and like, explain like, hey, there's a language barrier, plus like I can't really explain that I'm atheist or whatever. But regardless, I just I thought that was so fascinating. But I appreciate, like, even Finna kind of smile, appreciating, like, she probably could tell Kristen wasn't into the whole religious thing, but the fact is that she put the cross on her head and everything made her feel good. I was like, oh, got a buddy and everything. And also, I love David finding out about the I want you. It was from Father Winston. He wanted David to stay here, but David's kind of like, no, like, I need to be out there. God needs me out there. Because that was a conversation, too, about, like, okay, David actually likes it here. He's like, because Ben's like, yeah, because David's like, I wish there were just some things you couldn't explain. He's like, there are some things, like these people, I can't understand them all. He's like, yeah, but like their whole thing of like being able to quiet their mind, like there is some form of peace of mind kind of from a place like this. But even David's like, yeah, I tried to quiet my mind for 10 minutes. I nearly lost my mind. Because Ben was like, yeah, not being able to really talk to anybody. It's like, yeah, they talk to God and everything, but not being able to crack a joke or say something stupid. It's like, those are like the fun little moments of life. And kind of having that taken away from you is kind of uber depressing. So, but for David, it does kind of tempt him to want to stay here. But, it's like, right, I need to be out there. Plus, it's also probably the thing of, I can't believe I thought Kristen's the one that wrote that. I don't know, or whether he was thinking, like, nah, maybe it's the universe trying to, like, get my signs across of, like, yeah, I want her. And maybe there's some part of me that wants her to want me. I don't know. Like, I'm curious. It's just kind of, there's got to be some relief in David being like, right, that was, the thing got lifted up. So he wanted me to stay here. So I get that I want you now. It was from Father Winston, not Kristen. So. And as they're leaving, maybe this speaks volume. It's such a little thing, but then Kristen turns on her phone. There's no messages or anything from anyone. So there's probably a little bit of a depressing thing of like, right, I was going, the kids weren't too worried. They didn't call to check on me, ask if I was okay. Like, oh, that's what I interpreted from that, being like, oh, I guess everything's fine at home. No one felt that. Because she was worried, like, oh, but what my kids need me? It's like, oh, I guess they don't need me that much because they didn't bother contacting me, asking me if I was okay or checking up on me. But I can check up on them. So because it's also like, I'm sure there's some part of her brain that probably like, right, like there's a whole thing about anytime like her husband Andy would go away, it's like, yeah, like they'd be worried about him. That was a whole thing for a good chunk of season 1. So she probably just wished like, oh, I guess it doesn't work both ways. Granted, I was going for like maybe a few days. It's not the same amount of time Andy was going, but also maybe they're spending so much time with grandma, and maybe that kind of makes everything copacetic. But it's still kind of like like, oh, I miss you, Mom. I hope you're okay. Hey, none of that. I think that's probably what bugs her the most. But then, like, Finna comes out, gives her a bottle. It's like, oh, kind of remember a time. And before Kristen can hug her, like, she walks away because it's like, right, it's very probably like sacrilegious to do that. But Kristen left her to teach her and everything. And Finna grabs it and she's holding it, kind of like, yay. And I'm like, that's cool. I hope they're able to contact. Well, she'd have to come to the monastery for them to hang out again. So, but it's still kind of like, yeah, despite everything, a new buddy, Because also Finna wasn't as, like, stiff as everyone else at that facility. Because even the other nuns were super stiff. She's some, like, her and Kristen, they're kind of like the rebels that they are and stuff like that. Which, speaking of it, I love that when Kristen was changing, she stops and looks at one of the statues looking at her, and she kept stripping, almost kind of like, no, fuck you. Yeah, haha, I did it anyway. Like, oh, this place is so, like, oh, against, like, woman. It's like, oh, like, I should be ashamed of myself, like, stripping in front of you. It's like, well, no, she kind of, it's like double flipping him with a bird or something like that. So I thought that, once again, it's Kristen's rebellious nature, but also, like, it's like, right, this is a very old school way of, like, the way this place works is very old school, so. But a lot of really interesting things. I'm really curious to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.